We are providing an update on potential tropical cyclone 9, which is expected to become Hurricane Helene and impact Florida's Gulf Coast over the next several days. I have Kevin Guthrie, the Director of the Division of Emergency Management, with me here today. Yesterday, I signed an executive order declaring a state of emergency for 41 counties, which allows for state officials to make resources available to communities ahead of any potential storm impacts and to work to expeditiously prepare for the approaching storm. This morning, given the data that's coming in about the tracks of the storm, we've increased the number of counties to 61. Basically, every county in Florida outside southeast Florida, the coastal southeastern Florida counties are now included, and part of that is we expect effects could reach significantly inland. We have requested a pre-fall emergency declaration from FEMA. We expect that to be approved very quickly. Here at the Emergency Operations Center, we are, of course, on full activation. As of this morning, potential tropical cyclone 9 is located about 120 miles west-southwest of Grand Cayman, about 240 miles south-southeast of the western tip of Cuba, and it's moving northwestward at 8 miles per hour. Now, the storm has not yet formed, but we anticipate that to form within the next 12 to 24 hours and be a potentially very dangerous storm. The models currently range from it developing into a tropical storm all the way to a major hurricane at Category 4. If you look at the National Hurricane Center, they have put out their cone, and they're actually forecasting it to be a major hurricane by the time it reaches landfall, which is Category 3 or higher. And they've never in their history forecasted a major at this stage of development, and part of it, I think, is because there's some similarities to the track that was taken on Hurricane Michael. And I think the thought is that when it's over the Gulf, especially the more north it goes rather than east, it has a chance to have a rapid intensification. So we, as always, we prepare for the worst, we hope for the best, but we'd rather be prepared and then have it not reach that level than just hope that it doesn't intensify and then be caught not being prepared. So we do anticipate that it will intensify before it makes landfall. We do anticipate it's going to form in the next 12 to 24 hours. We also anticipate the storm's going to move pretty quickly once it gets beyond the Yucatan and Cuba, and it's got a pretty good runway throughout the Gulf of Mexico. The Big Bend and Panhandle should be especially prepared for a direct impact. We just got some model runs this morning that take it as far west as pretty close to Panama City. And I think the eastern routes are probably more in the Big Bend region. And that's just the direct impact. But I think it's important that people don't get wedded to these cones. First of all, the cone, you could be out of the cone and you could still have major impacts. And the further east this goes, may not be have as much runway to have the maximum intensification, but that brings in the entire western coast of Florida for potential significant storm surge. So just know that this thing's there, know that this could have broad impacts, and we're anticipating impacts, 100, 200 miles outside of the eye of the storm, you could see with winds and you can see with surge. So if you're in the Tampa Bay area, you anticipate that you're going to see impacts. We could also see impacts in southwest Florida with some of the surge, just depending on what the track is. And then, of course, the northern part of the state will end up getting a direct impact at some portion of there. But there's still a lot of uncertainty here. So I think people just should know that, hey, this is out there. We are going to see significant impacts no matter what happens. But don't act like, well, the cone moved another 20 miles to the west, therefore we're going to in the clear. There's still a lot of uncertainty left with this, so just be prepared. And that's one of the reasons why we've done the 61 counties, because we understand that you could have impacts that are outside of where the current cone is, and in fact we anticipate there to be impacts beyond the current cone. So now you still have time to prepare. Review your hurricane plan and make sure that you are executing your hurricane preparedness plan. Your gas tanks filled, water, non-perishable food that will last you, particularly when you have power outages. Clear up any loose objects in your yard that could become a flying object in strong winds. Know your evacuation zone. We always say that you hide from the wind, but you run from the water. Very well may be these local, the county level, will issue some evacuation orders for some of the low-lying coastal areas. That is absolutely something that is likely to happen. So heed those directives and make sure you're taking the appropriate steps to protect you and your family. But you have time to be able to put this plan into place. We anticipate the storm is likely to make landfall sometime on Thursday night. We will, of course, see impacts before then, but for the rest of today, and probably even into tomorrow morning, you're going to have opportunities. And look, this formation may take a little longer. That will push it back further before we see impacts. We don't know that yet, but it's possible you could see Friday morning impacts if the storm takes longer. So right now, regardless of how it forms or the speed, right now you do have time. So take advantage of that time. Low-lying areas, of course, can increase a community's flood risk. Residents should learn if their dwelling is at risk by visiting FEMA's MAP Service Center at msc.fema.gov or through the property appraiser's website. Floridians can also get up-to-date shelter status information at floridadisaster.org/shelters or reach out to their local county emergency management for more information. Not every shelter is pet-friendly, but every county is going to have at least one pet-friendly shelter, so please take advantage of that. Call ahead online to make sure you're going where you need to go. So prepare. You have time to do it. There's a lot of uncertainty with this storm, but the one thing that is certain is we are going to see some impacts. So just prepare yourself accordingly. Now, the Florida Division of Emergency Management is already responding to storm-related resource requests from local communities. These are from counties and municipalities, and they've gotten requests and are acting on deploying high-water vehicles, providing water, tarps, generators, and additional first responders and other personnel. As we typically do, we are amassing many thousands of linemen who are going to be ready. I think we're up to 18,000 now. There's more that are going to be en route at safe locations like highway way stations and state lands just outside of potential areas of impact. As these storms pass, we want to get people in to be able to get the power back on. But Floridians should just be prepared if you are in the path of this storm within probably 200 miles of it. There's going to be some strong winds. You're going to see power go out in various sections of the state. So just prepare for that. Prepare that you will lose power. Have a plan in place to be able to ride that out. We've been fortunate in Florida that we have a culture here where we really want to put get the power back on. We've got great companies that are working very hard on this. We've got the municipal cooperatives they're doing tremendous compared to what was done 5 or 10 years ago. So that's great. But we've seen in the past where people have been without a power for a long time. You don't know how the storm's going to impact some of this. It's one thing to knock a line down. Yeah, you can get that up. If there's a major hurricane, can uproot something, you may have to rebuild the entire portion of that. So just be prepared to have a power outage, but know we are amassing significant resources to be able to move in and to be able to restore power as rapidly as possible. We also have hundreds of Starlinks ready to deploy for internet. So if internet access is lost, we can deploy those Starlinks and get people back online, particularly in businesses who are going to need that to keep the doors open. We did for Debbie last month, we did flood protection devices, and we are staging those all along the Gulf Coast for storm surge and flooding protection, particularly with the utility substations. So we have 150,000 linear feet of flood protection devices to be deployed before the storm makes landfall. What I'd say to some of the local governments is use this. Not only do we have 150,000 linear feet, the Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of this. This proved to be successful with Debbie. I mean, Debbie was not a major hurricane, but it brought a lot of water, a lot of rain. You saw a lot of flooding, and there wasn't a single substation that had these flood protection devices around them that was put out of pocket as a result of the water. So that's what we want to do. Makes it a lot easier to get people back online. So particularly for our coastal counties on the Gulf Coast, utilize this. Kevin and his team are standing by to be able to get this done, and I think it's going to be something that you'll be glad that you did. And that's not just for government property. I mean, that can be deployed to protect a private substation. That's fine. I mean, what difference does it make if you get the power back on? And we want to make sure that we're helping in any way that we can. We have 3,000 Florida National Guard soldiers ready to assist. Kevin and his team, search and rescue, route clearance, commodity distribution, and protection of critical infrastructure. We've also activated the Florida State Guard, and they have 10 shallow water vessel boat teams on standby, 7 flat bottom flood rescue skiffs, 12 UTVs, 15 cut and toss crews, 2 amphibious rescue vehicles, 7 search and rescue crews, and 1 UH-60 Blackhawk for daytime aerial assessment and logistics mission. Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission has high water vehicles and other storm response resources available statewide, and they will rapidly deploy in the event that those are needed. And just as we're doing with the linemen and utility vehicles, we're setting up logistical staging areas in strategic locations across northwest, north central, and northeast Florida. So I think right now Kevin has Mariana, he's got Cecil Field in northeast Florida, and then he has Marion County at the equestrian center there. And the goal is to have that ready when the storm passes, get those where they need to be. Florida Department of Transportation is currently inspecting and cleaning clearing drainage systems, monitoring flood-prone and currently saturated areas, and pre-positioning pumps as appropriate. FDOT has deployed traffic signal generators and pumps to clear and maintain the operability of intersections around the state. Emergency alerts can save lives, so please have multiple ways to receive those alerts and act immediately when you do receive them. Your local emergency management and local officials will have information that is most relevant to your specific area. But I also encourage residents to stay attentive to guidance issued by the State Division of Emergency Management. Counties have begun preparation efforts, including opening sandbag filling stations. For updates on county resources available, visit floridadisaster.org/counties. Stay safe. Make sure that you prepare yourself, and we'll continue to provide updates as we get new information. But for the state of Florida, you know, we've turned on everything starting yesterday. We're rocking and rolling just like we are guaranteed to have a major hurricane. Again, we don't know exactly, hasn't formed yet. There's still some uncertainty, but I think the fact that this would be forecasted as a major at this point without formation shows that this has a potential to be a really, really significant storm. So you have time to prepare, you have time to plan, you have time to take the action that you need to protect you and your family, and we encourage you to do that. And with that, I'll bring up Kevin Guthrie.
Good afternoon, or I'm sorry, good morning. I want to express again my thanks to Governor DeSantis for his swift action in declaring a state of emergency. Again, I think I don't want that to be lost on anybody. It is unprecedented how forward-leaning this governor has been throughout his 6 years of doing this. We've never had this type of leaning forward at the state in recent memory. So again, thank you, Governor, for giving me the opportunity to be successful with the team behind us. Storm surge watches are in effect for the entire Gulf Coast to the eastern Florida Panhandle, meaning that there is a possibility of life-threatening rising water moving inland from the coastline in the next 48 hours. This is very important. The governor has already talked about utilizing our flood control devices. We also have beach control devices. We have stuff for local governments, for county governments. We want to make sure that we protect as much of our coastline infrastructure as possible, as well as any private property. We're here ready to respond. All we need is for the counties to let us know what it is that they need. Hurricane watches are in effect for the eastern Florida Panhandle, Big Bend, and coastal West Florida, with tropical storm watches extending inland to the I-4 corridor. This means tropical storm conditions are possible within the next 48 hours. Many of you may ask the question, why did we expand the area? The governor has already alluded to it, but the information we are receiving, this hurricane will have tropical storm force winds in excess of 250 miles from the center. That will encompass most of the peninsula from the Space Coast all the way through the first coast, and then on the west coast of Florida, the entire coastal portion of the west coast of Florida. I urge Floridians to finalize your storm preparations now. The governor's already mentioned that. Make sure you're planning. You still have time. Go ahead, get those preparations done today, as most emergency managers at the local level will probably start calling for evacuations in the next 12 to 24 hours. So make sure you're planning and preparing today. Make sure your entire family knows that disaster plan and what they should do. Make sure you include your pets. Make sure you include any senior citizens in your family, and you are prepared for that. We want to make sure that you have enough food and water for 7 days. Right? Food, water, your essentials for 7 days. Again, we think that there are going to be portions. If you're in a more urban core area, it may not take us 7 days to get your power back on. If you're living in a very rural area where you have miles and miles and miles of feeder lines that service 100 customers, that may take us a little bit longer to get that done. So please make sure that you have food for 7 days. Don't forget that your pets are there. Make sure you take pictures of your valuables in your home and put copies of important documents in a safe, dry location. If you or a loved one have access or functional needs issues, please register today with the Florida Special Needs Registry at floridadisaster.org/SNR. That's Sierra November Romeo. Please make sure you do that. This will provide local first responders ahead of the storm that you need further assistance. Many counties, not all, but many counties have a door-to-door service that they will come to your home, they will pick you up, they will get you to a special needs shelter or a functional needs shelter and help you. So if you're new to Florida or you do not know about this service, please make sure you go to floridadisaster.org/SNR. If an evacuation order is called for your area by local officials, you can see which zones are called for at floridadisaster.org/evacuation orders. If you are ordered to evacuate by your county, please do so. As a former local emergency manager, I can tell you that the one thing that I just gave a lot of thought, a lot of time and effort in, is the evacuation order decision. The last thing you want to do is put people on the road when they don't need to be on the road. This is, every single county emergency manager struggles over this, but at the end of the day, they make the decision that's best for their community. Make sure that if your emergency management director at the local level calls for that evacuation, that you heed their evacuation order. I want to encourage all of us to make sure that we are looking for gas now. One of our campaigns is halfway full, halfway there. We want you, the half right now is the new empty. When you get to halfway, go ahead and fill it up. This is going to reduce the amount of run of on gas stations. It's going to reduce the amount of wait time. So again, if you're at half full, go ahead and top off, both with your electric vehicles as well as your gas-powered vehicles. Also encourage you to follow us on social media links. We are on X, we are on Instagram at FLSERT, and on Facebook at FDEM. Floridians looking for resources on how to prepare and other state updates, including all of our state agency updates, can go to floridadisaster.org/updates for additional information. And as always, again, I cannot underscore the fact that this governor is doing everything he can to protect the citizens of the state of Florida and giving us the tools and ability to do that. So again, Governor, thank you very much.
And then if you're asked to evacuate by a local emergency management or county officials, you don't need to get in the car and drive a couple hundred miles to just get away from any impacts of the storm. If you're on one of those low-lying areas, the evacuation is not because your home can't withstand the winds. Most homes in Florida probably can at this point. It's the fear of what happens with the water to get inland, get on higher ground, And if you're in a building that is built to hurricane specifications, whether it's a shelter, a hotel, a friend's house, you're fine to ride out the storm. So most of the evacuations from the low-lying areas, people do not need to even leave their county in most instances. It's just getting away from when that water comes, and then as soon as the storm passes, you go out, and hopefully you don't have major damage. But the reality is that water, when you're there, that's tough. The wind you can hide from. Anything that's shelter in Florida is going to be able to withstand the wind. But it's the water that can be really, really devastating if you remain there when you're told to evacuate. So please just keep that in mind. We've seen examples of this in the past, and we just want to make sure that people are able to be safe. Okay. Any questions? Yep.
Governor, I'm curious. We're close to election. Obviously, we're still early on, but any impacts in election operations?
I don't think so. I mean, if you remember, we had Hurricane Ian in 2022, so that was probably about this time in September, maybe a few days later, the end of September, beginning of October. Really, really catastrophic Category 5 storm in a very populated area. And we ended up, I think, not only having the election go smoothly, I think they did better turnout than they did in the prior midterm for that. So we'll be able to handle that. It's too soon to know whether there will need to be any accommodations made. I think we did do at the request of some of those affected counties. I think we did do some super centers kind of deal. But I'm confident we'll be able to figure that out. But that right now, just be safe. You're going to be able to vote. That's not going to be an issue.
For many of these people, this will be their third storm in 13 months. I guess can you kind of talk about what you guys are doing to help these people kind of prepare while rebuilding from the previous two storms?
Well, not only that, I mean, if you go back 6 years to Michael, and we've done a lot to help, and there's been a lot of bounce back, but there's still, with a storm that big. So as we see some of these models, and they haven't really, most of them are east of Bay County, but to have one even go there would be really tough. And then you got the Big Bend. Idalia was a major hurricane. Debbie was not a major, but it had gone basically on the same path, and so you've had damage. So it is possible that we have an Idalia Debbie track. That is possible, and this potentially could be even more powerful than Idalia. We'll see, but it's going to potentially impact areas that are in the process of rebuilding, not just in the Big Bend, but also Panama City still with that. And I think some of you who remember that, you could go and, you could see, like any of those old buildings, if that was in the path, you saw total destruction. That was a massive, massive amount of damage. This path is not necessarily wildly dissimilar. It's not exactly the same as Michael, but if you remember with Michael, people knew there was some weather out there. They thought there would be something. No one was predicting a Category 5 at the time. It really went quickly. It really intensified. So I think one of the reasons that the Hurricane Center has forecast a major even before this has formed is that experience with Michael, that we know once it gets through past the Yucatan and Cuba, it's got some warm water, it's got a good runway, and you could see it move quick, and you could see it intensify. And Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is going to move faster than I think the other two storms more recently, Idalia and Debbie. And look, there's pluses and minuses with all this, right? When it's moving fast, especially if it's further west, it's going to get stronger, and the winds are going to be more significant. When it's slower, it tends to bring more inundation. So we're looking at some significant rain, but I don't think on Debbie's level, certainly not on Ian's level. So you just kind of got to look to see. But there's uncertainty with all of this. I think most people would say the further east it tracks, it's not going to have as much runway to get the maximum intensity. The further west it tracks, it's got that runway. The more it goes due north, let's say, from where it is now, once it gets past the Yucatan, then you're looking at potentially even more significant rapid intensification. So there's a range of possibilities here. These guys, Kevin, and they're working with the Hurricane Center. We've got our meteorologists looking at all the model runs. There is some variation in terms of intensity, ranging from tropical storm to Cat 4. I think this morning there was one Cat 4 prediction. Now I think there's 3 models that have Cat 4, but then yesterday there was some that had Cat 5. None of the models have Cat 5 now. So bottom line is, it's a chance to have a major impact, so just prepare as if it's going to be as strong as possible. Yep.
Evacuations, are there certain zones in certain counties where you think people should be especially prepared, or where you're anticipating evacuation orders coming down?
So what I would say is, one, any evacuation directive is going to be administered locally, partially because if they say get off a barrier island, they're responsible for enforcing that, whether it's bridge closures or any of that. So listen to those folks. But I think if you look from the Tampa Bay area all the way up that west coast of Florida, you have potential major storm surge. And you could even have more south of Tampa Bay, depending on how the storm tracks. The more it tracks east, I think the farther south you're going to see impacts. The more it tracks west, less maybe in southwest Florida than you could. So there's a range of possibilities, and I think those local officials will be looking at that and then making the best judgment. As Kevin said, it's not a light decision to tell people that they need to evacuate their home. And you don't want to do that unless you have an adequate basis to do it, because if you do it without an adequate basis and then nothing happens, then the next time people are less likely to want to listen. So I think people have been through this enough, certainly in the counties, that they understand that, and I think they'll be making good judgments on that. But yes, I mean, there is a possibility of having, particularly those low-lying areas, if you look at some of the storm surge possibilities, that would potentially be something that would likely necessitate that. So just listen to your folks locally. It's not going to be the same in every part of the Florida West Coast, but there's going to be some that potentially have bigger impacts than others. And there's some that are more vulnerable to impacts than others. I mean, Pinellas County doesn't need a hurricane to flood. I grew up there. It's a low-lying area. It's surrounded by water. So clearly, if you have a storm, and the eye doesn't even have to really, as Kevin said, be that close to it, if it's 200 miles away, you're still going to see impacts there. No question. The further west it goes, probably the less storm surge you're going to see on the Florida Peninsula's west coast. The more east, the more storm surge you're going to see. So people can do that, and we're looking for formation. Once we get formation, we get it out of where it's in now, out into the open Gulf. I think they're probably going to have some pretty accurate forecasts at that point.
If the storm is perhaps putting Tallahassee right in its crosshairs, I mean, have you taken any steps to preserve government, perhaps get out of Dodge if Tallahassee?
No, I'm not getting out of Dodge. We'll be here. We're good. This is a hurricane-proof thing. Tallahassee is tough just because, I mean, you guys that live here, there's a lot of trees. There's a lot of prospect for debris. It would not, if it hit the coast as a major, it would slow some by the time it got to, but you're still looking at potentially, you could have 120 mile an hour winds could potentially impact Tallahassee if it's a major hurricane when it hits, but even 100 mile an hour winds will cause a lot of damage. So Kevin is working with the local officials here in Leon at the city and county level, and they're actually working very well with Kevin and his team. We want to be able to get debris cleared, and we want to be able to get power back on, because even if it's tropical storm winds, you are going to see debris if Tallahassee. Now, if it goes further east, we've been through these tracks the last 2 years. You get on that weak side of the storm, it's not like you would never see any impact, but it's much different than if you get a direct hit or if you're on the east side of the storm. If Tallahassee's on the east side of the storm, you're going to see a little bit more significant. But yes, we will be here. We had a previously scheduled event tomorrow morning, a prayer breakfast, and we're going to do that. My wife and I are both going to do that. It's down in the Tampa Bay area. So we will do that tomorrow morning. We're going to probably make some stops along the way to visit the linemen and some of the prep, but we will be here in Tallahassee for the storm. Everyone will be working out of the Emergency Operations Center, and we don't anticipate there being any issue with continuity. Yes?
Governor, good morning. Lord forbid, but if this storm does strike as a Category 4, what kind of considerations are you making for the state's property insurance market and its consumers, and how devastating could a major hurricane be to the market?
Well, we had a major in last year with Idalia. It was a Category 3, close to Category 4. And in 2024 so far, I think we've had 57 companies file either no increases or reduction in rates. That is not happening in very many states around this country. You have people that are actually increasing their exposure in the state of Florida. And I think part of it is, obviously, we had to do some reforms a year and a half ago that put us more in line with how these markets function in other states, and I think that's been attractive. But I think it's also the fact that if you look at these storms, Florida building specifications can handle these storms, the newer construction. I know there's buildings from 30, 40, 50 years ago, maybe not at the same specifications. But even with Michael, the new buildings, you'd look at them, and this was a Category 5. These new buildings made it through. Ian, the new buildings made it through. Even the manufactured homes in Ian, I remember like just holding my breath. I cannot even imagine what some of these manufactured homes communities are going to be like. And some of those newer ones, honestly, did pretty well. So I think that's what people have seen. They've seen how this the building code has really, I think, worked. I think most of the damage that we've seen in recent storms have been with construction that's been a little bit older. On the wind, now on the water, when you have the surge and the storm surge, I mean, I know people build the homes up and they build buildings up higher maybe than they used to, but the water is something that could be difficult. So I think we're going to be fine on this stuff. We'll provide relief with Kevin and his team, the immediate relief. Hopefully, we don't have people in jeopardy of losing life and limb. I think if people make the adequate preparations, I don't think it needs to come to that. I mean, I think the last two storms have done a pretty good job in terms of we have all this search and rescue, and people were basically heeded the calls. Of course, in Ian, there was a huge search and rescue effort, understandably how big that storm was, and you had a lot of people that remained. So that's going to be the first order of business, make sure we protect life and limb, and then restore the services with both the power and any other services that are interrupted to get people back to normal. So we obviously hope for as small of interruption as possible. But we got to prepare for a big one, and that's why Kevin and his team have amassed so many resources already. And these resources are being added by the minute. So you're going to continue to have more linemen brought in. You're going to continue to have more beef added to these staging areas. And we'll continue to watch the forecast, watch how this develops, see what the time frame is going to be. But we're going to get something, that's for sure. Okay, we'll have another brief, maybe today, but definitely tomorrow.